The Vreth Border Survey Station at Kethadova was not a military installation. That was the first thing the mission brief made clear. Administrative clearance only, it said. No combat designation. No weapons beyond sidearms. Manifest your full party, handlers, attachés, animals, and submit to standard intake processing by the Vreth Analytical Lattice before proceeding to the interior zones. Estimated time on site, 4 hours. I read the brief twice on the shuttle down, then folded it into my chest pocket. Hasso had his chin on my knee and was breathing slow and steady, the way he always did on descent. Nothing in the brief was going to change what I was bringing with me. Hasso is 7 years old. English Mastiff, brindle, 68 kilograms. He has a gray muzzle that started coming in around age 4, and ears that fold forward when he's interested in something and hang flat when he's not. His tail moves at about the same tempo as a clock pendulum. Not fast, not agitated, just steady, like everything else about him. He is listed on every manifest I have ever submitted as non-combat companion animal, handler assigned. That is accurate. He does not work. He is not trained for detection or protection, or any of the other things the Corps likes to write up in triplicate. He is simply mine, and that arrangement has held for 6 years without either of us seeing a reason to revisit it. The Vreth Analytical Lattice had been running border intake scans for, by their own records, 411 standard years. It had filed approximately 83 million lifeforms across that span, cataloged by biology, behavioral output, threat classification, and what the Vreth called developmental ceiling, which was their way of asking how dangerous a thing could theoretically become if it really applied itself. Every filed entry was closed. That was the point of the system. You came through, you were scanned, you were tiered, the file was closed. 83 million entries, 83 million closed files. I didn't know any of that when we stepped off the shuttle onto the survey field at Kethadova. What I knew was that it was cooler than the brief suggested, that the Vreth processing nodes were arranged in a wide arc along the tree line to the north, and that Hasso had already identified a patch of damp ground near the landing struts and was nosing at it with the focused interest he reserves for things that smell like something worth knowing. Hasso. He looked up. I tilted my head toward the processing arc. He came. The intake team was 3 Vreth officials and 1 Lattice field node, a freestanding unit, about 1.5 meters tall, matte gray, with a scanning aperture at the top that rotated slowly toward each member of our party as we approached. The Vreth officials were tall, pale-limbed, dressed in the long administrative coats they favor, fingers folded at their middles in what I had been told was a neutral posture. They looked at Hasso the way they look at most things, with careful attention and no readable expression. One of them, the senior, I assumed from the additional banding on her coat, held a data slate and began reading from our submitted manifest. Handler Corporal Fenwick, Deo. Attached party, 3 personnel. 1 companion animal, non-combat designation. She looked up from the slate and down at Hasso. Terran Canid. Breed classification pending Lattice confirmation. Mastiff, I said. English. Registered. She noted that. The Lattice node rotated its aperture toward Hasso and held. Hasso sat. He was not told to. It's simply what he does when something is pointed at him. He sits and looks at it with the patient attention of something that has all the time in the world and knows it. The aperture held on him for a longer interval than it had held on any of our 3 personnel. I noticed that, but I didn't think much of it. Then the drone swarm started. They called it a calibration event in the after-action report. The Vreth used small autonomous survey drones to map subsurface variations along the border corridors, and the swarm they run out of Kethadova station occasionally produces what their technicians call a resonance collapse. The units lose their spacing protocols and compress into a mass about 15 meters across, moving fast and low, and for the approximately 40 seconds it takes the system to autocorrect. That mass sounds like standing inside a turbine. We had not been briefed on calibration events. That was, I was told later, an oversight. The swarm came out of the northern tree line. The Vreth officials moved immediately, 2 of them toward the station shelter on the east side of the field, the 3rd behind the shuttle. Our 3 personnel were already running. The lattice node, being a machine, remained where it was. I stayed where I was too, because I was watching Hasso, and Hasso was not moving toward shelter. He was moving toward the tree line, not toward the swarm, at an angle, toward the edge of the field, where the sensor posts marked the perimeter. I followed his line of sight, and I saw what he had seen before I did, a small figure at the field's edge, about 40 meters out, standing still in the low grass. It was a Vreth juvenile, young enough that I couldn't estimate an age, but small, slight, pale-limbed, standing with both sets of hands pressed flat against its torso in what I would later learn was a posture of involuntary motor lockdown, frozen. The swarm was already past the tree line and moving across the open field, and the juvenile was directly in its path. Hasso walked out to meet the situation. Not at a run, he walked. That steady, unhurried mastiff walk. He moved to the juvenile's position, turned his body so that his flank and shoulder were toward the swarm, sat down in the grass, and looked at the oncoming mass of drones with the same measured attention he had given the lattice aperture. He did not bark, he did not lunge, he did not do anything that could be reasonably described as a threat display. He sat between the juvenile and the swarm, and he waited. The swarm's navigation system auto-corrected before it reached them. The swarm broke apart at approximately 8 meters out, and the individual units dispersed back toward the tree line. 40 seconds, as advertised. No contact. But I watched the lattice node during those 40 seconds. Its aperture, which had been drifting back toward idle after our personnel scattered, snapped to Hasso the moment he moved toward the juvenile and did not move again. It held on him through the entire event, still holding when the swarm dispersed, and the juvenile, recovered enough to move, backed away from Hasso on unsteady legs, and then turned and ran toward the shelter. Hasso watched the juvenile go. Then he turned and walked back to me, and leaned his full weight against my leg, which is what he does when he's decided a situation has resolved and he's ready to be somewhere quieter. I put my hand on his head. He sighed. The senior official emerged from behind the shuttle about 2 minutes later. She spoke briefly into her comm, then came to where I was standing, eyes on the data slate, scrolling through something. Her expression was doing something I could not name. "The lattice has completed processing for your party," she said. "Good. 3 personnel, fully filed. Your documentation has been approved for interior access." A pause. She was still looking at the slate. "The companion animal scan has been flagged for extended review." "How extended?" She looked up. "The file is being held open," she said. "Indefinitely." I asked her what that meant, and she explained, with careful Vreth precision, that the lattice assigns every cataloged lifeform a threat tier based on behavioral probability matrices in continuous development for 411 years. The matrices account for predation patterns, territorial aggression, defensive response thresholds, and approximately 900 additional parameters. When a scanned organism's behavioral output falls outside the prediction range, the file is held pending classification review. The lattice had predicted that an unaccompanied large terrestrial predator, upon encountering a sudden high-stimulus event in open terrain with an unfamiliar juvenile present, would exhibit one of 14 documented behavioral responses. It had recorded Hasso's output from the moment the aperture locked on him and run that output against all 14 in real time. Hasso had not produced any of them. The official handed me a copy of the preliminary note that the field node had transmitted to the main station. The bottom line, which the lattice had generated in the clipped administrative language it uses for all communications, read, "Behavioral pattern recorded. Protective orientation toward identified vulnerable organism. No matching threat tier. File held open." I read it. Then I folded it and put it in my chest pocket, next to the mission brief. Hasso had found the patch of damp soil again and was investigating it with his nose. His tail was moving at the usual tempo. His gray muzzle was damp at the tip. The Vreth Analytical Lattice has, in 411 years of operation, filed 83 million entries and closed every one. It processed every member of our party at Kethadova, and then left one file open without explanation, because its matrices did not have language for what it had recorded. I didn't tell the Corps. There was nothing to report. He's a companion animal, non-combat designation. He sat in a field for 40 seconds, and then came back and leaned on my leg. He was asleep on my boot by the time we boarded the shuttle home. Some things, I have found, don't fit the categories that were built to hold them. The Vreth Lattice, to its considerable credit, at least had the sense to leave the question open.